Hey, this is Michael Lindsay from Vital MX. We're out here at Pala Raceway today, and we're kicking off the next week of testing for our 2018 450 shootout. This year's shootout was definitely tough. It's really warm here in Southern California at the end of the summer. We rode a couple days out here where it was a little over 110 degrees. We got through it though, and we're here with the final result. For you guys that like it short and sweet, we have this video. We're gonna roll through the pros, the cons, and the quick results. For those that like to nitpick and really want to see everything that's going on, we've got tech specs, dyno charts, we've got some lap times, all the weights, and more than that, we have all 7 of our test riders' individual thoughts and results. You can dive into the article to see how we came up with these conclusions and how each rider actually ranked each motorcycle and how we end up with the score totals that we did. If you want to see that, if you're on VitalMX.com, scroll down. If you're on YouTube or anywhere else, scroll down. You should find a link that'll take you to our site. But for now, we're just going to kick right off into it. 6th place, last on our list, is the 2018 Suzuki RMZ 450. How is it that probably the most highly weighted bike in this test still ended up at the bottom of the list? That's kind of simple and hard to describe at the same time. Suzuki had a few performance goals in mind with this bike, and I will say, and most of the test riders agreed, they met them. Engine, they went for top-end performance. They were able to get there. Low to mid, they didn't improve over the previous model. They thinned up the chassis. They lost some weight. The bike feels a little bit more nimble between the legs when you first get on it. They did gain that weight back, though, by going to Showa's 49mm A-kit type spring fork. This is a big improvement over the SFF TAC air fork that Suzuki's been struggling with a couple years. As for the new chassis itself, it feels great. It keeps Suzuki's great turning qualities. This bike's awesome to dive inside. A lot of guys said they were still surprised. They were kind of worried on the new chassis. They might give up some of those qualities, but it handles great. It's one of the easiest bikes to lane a turn and carves like no other. Now, where's the downside? There's 3 major things that stand out. 1, they went to a new shock called a BFRC. It's Showa's balance-free rear cushion. This is road race technology. It's been dabbled in a little bit with factory teams. Nobody's brought it to the production or consumer level, and there seems to be a reason why. The shock naturally has a very active feel, and in production trim, it's really seeming to struggle with that. Basically, what we're saying is the shock never really settles down. When you're under throttle, it just kind of climbs out of the stroke. It pretty much brings the rear end of the bike up all the time. So we're always struggling to keep the bike squatted, to keep it planted. It feels loose in the rear end. It just really kind of killed a lot of guys' confidence in the overall chassis because the balance of the bike was being constantly thrown off by this shock. Even with a lot of the adjustments made, we weren't able to quite kill these characteristics. We could meet it somewhere in the middle and lose a lot of the comfort, but it really kind of killed the enjoyment of the bike. Beyond that, the actual weight of the motorcycle, it's still near the top of the list. Even though there are 2 other bikes there close to it, the Yamaha and the Honda, the Suzuki feels much heavier than them to ride. And a lot of guys said they really noticed it this year where a lot of the other bikes have been going on diets or really working on what their weight is. The Suzuki just feels kind of old school heavy to ride. The last thing too, a lot of people were disappointed in, after all this time of waiting, the bike doesn't have electric start standard. I know for some people that doesn't matter. 4 of the bikes in this test have them. Suzuki is still near the top of the weight scales, and they didn't add it. That was really a disappointment to quite a few of the guys. If you want to learn more about what we were struggling with setup, I really recommend that you check out the article. There's a lot of detail in there about this bike from every rider. Moving into 5th place is the Kawasaki KX450F. This really isn't a big surprise for us considering that the Kawasaki actually did not change this year. The only thing that really changed for us in testing is because Kawasaki still has Showa's SFF TAC fork, there's a lot you can do with the air pressures. Kawi brought it to us to test this year with a couple different optional settings on the air pressures. We spent more time dealing with that this year. Quite a few of the riders reported a bit more comfort and feel in the front end than they had over the previous years. Other than that, the bike didn't change. So the positives a lot of riders report is great low to mid performance. It's very snappy. It comes on aggressively. It makes it really easy to keep that classic Kawi rear steer feel where you can break it loose and be aggressive with it. Downside is it's starting to lose against the other bikes in the top end performance, so it doesn't have overall as good spread of power. And albeit we said the fork is more comfortable, it's still not that good compared to a lot of bikes in the class. You can get it okay, but not as great and as plush as a lot of the other options out there. Beyond that as well, the bike doesn't have electric start, which it got dinged on considering all 4 bikes above it have it standard. And it's just a little bit long in the tooth. A lot of guys like the ergos on it. A lot of guys want more front end steer out of it. It's better than some previous Kawi years, but it doesn't have quite the front end turning abilities as a lot of the bikes above it. All in all, it's still a decent all around package, but that's where the ratings fell for it. Coming in 4th place is the most changed bike in the test, the Yamaha YZ450F. When a lot of our test riders heard what the final combined result was for this bike in 4th, they all kind of agreed it doesn't show how much better it is this year. 4th is where it finished overall last year, but the individual scores were better this year. It just didn't quite crack into the top 3 overall. This year they came out with an all-new chassis, all-new bodywork. They thinned out the bike a ton. They've got a bunch of engine revisions, electric start standard, and even though they already have great suspension, they even worked on that and made it better. So what all the test riders agreed is this is the best bike in the test when it comes to suspension. Everybody raved about the forks and shock. A few people labeled it couch-like, and that could be considered a diss or a positive. Couch-like because the seat, the whole bike kind of feels soft. It takes up everything you throw at it. At the same time, it can feel a little lazy in the overall action of the bike. So if you guys still said it felt bigger than it really is because of that, but they all agreed it's amazing to ride in the worst conditions because of how comfortable it is. The engine, as a lot of people know, Yamaha is really great in this regard. It did bring up a little bit of controversy between our guys. Some people absolutely raved about this thing. It makes a huge amount of torque, a huge spread of power everywhere. Biggest thing though is the gearing. Yamaha has chose to kind of go to a little bit different gearing that spreads out the power more, takes this beast of an engine, calms it down and makes it usable. For some of the guys, the gearing is too spread on the bike though a little bit, so it got nitpicked there, where it felt like in second it was too low RPM compared to some of their bikes and you're using a little too much clutch in the tight corners. And it just felt like the shift points were way different than other motorcycles. Some guys really appreciated this, got used to and used it to their advantage because of the way you can ride the bike. Some people kind of were a little more up in the air because it just didn't fit their styles. Beyond that, even though the bike is a lot thinner, a lot of guys still say it feels a bit heavier than the rest of the bikes in the class just because of the overall seat taper, the softness of the bike, everything. It feels a little bit lazier than some of the machines. But overall, huge improvement on the chassis. Everybody agreed that this bike went a huge step in the correct direction for 18. With a few more major revisions, it really could be up there in the podium and battling for the win. Coming in 3rd place is actually last year's winner, the Husqvarna FC450. Now last year's podium in the top 3 was separated by literally a point between each bike. One person's decision would have changed it all. And this year the top 3 is ridiculously close again, but it's been a little bit reversed. The Husky went from 1st to 3rd, and this is just right down to the tiniest little decisions and what the guys think about each motorcycle. Everybody agrees the Husky has this huge spread of power as well, kind of like the Yamaha. It's a little bit different in the way it pulls though. It makes a ton of its power mid to top. Off the bottom though, it's pretty mellow because the bike revs on slowly. The lighter guys in the test, they really liked it. They liked the Magura clutch, the hydro on it, to be able to pop into the power when they need it or use the smooth when they want to. Some of the bigger guys in the test thought it was a little too lethargic for their style, and that's where it got some knocks. As for the chassis, everybody is loving Husqvarna's steel, the chromoly chassis, the flex characteristics, the balance between steering and stability is raved on. Nobody really has a problem in that regard. Down to the suspension is the last little bit of nitpicking. Even though the WP AER 48 is everybody's pretty much preferred air fork at this point, it still doesn't quite have the comfort of a KYB SSS fork found on the Yamaha, or even that new Showa spring fork is getting right up there, if not surpassing it a little bit. A few guys in the test really liked the fork. A couple struggled with it just a little bit, enough to give it just enough marks that it ended up 3rd. Everybody still does love the fit in the finish of the Husky, the great brakes, the hydro, electric start. Like I said, all that's great parts, but it just finished slightly behind its brethren in 2nd, the KTM 450 SXF. This is the same spot the KTM finished last year by 1 point behind the winner, and that's what it did again this year. KTM uses the tagline ready to race, and everybody agrees that this tagline is pretty darn on the money. The KTM is the most precision machine in the group. A lot of people compared it to a surgeon. It's so accurate. Wherever you point it, the bike goes. It's the easiest bike to dive to the inside on. It has the best balance between stability and turning, similar to the Husky, although it's a little bit stiffer than the Husky in some regards. The Husky's a little bit more comfortable with the power and the way the chassis flexes. The KTM feels a little bit stiffer, a little more rigid, so in some places it's not as comfortable, but in other places it's a little more responsive. This also falls into the engine because of the different airbox between the two bikes. The KTM is a little bit snappier and responsive off the bottom, and it builds RPM quicker. For some guys, that was a little bit different. The bigger guys, the guys that wanted more snap, the KTM fell more in their likelihood. Some of the smaller guys were a little more on the fence between the smooth and the aggressive mapping that KTM had, thinking they could find a little bit better middle ground would be their preference. And then same thing with suspension. WP units have come a long way. The shock balance, fork balance is great. The bike is very balanced under braking, heavy acceleration. The shocks are a little more active on this bike than some of theirs. Not as bad as the Suzuki we talked about earlier. They're great on hard pack acceleration. You can dead them up just a little bit if you need them to squat and track more. The one thing that just held back the KTM just a tad bit is guys having split decisions over it in the Husky, and one or two guys still thinking that the WP AER 48.4 could improve just a little bit on comfort. So moving into first place, what was considered last year's big talked about bike, but only ended up third, was the Honda CRF 450R. Honda came back with a vengeance this year with a very short but precise list of revisions. Biggest one they did is very simple. They went after the suspension. Everybody agreed last year, from our heaviest to even our lightest riders, the forks were too soft. And when they're too soft for the lightest guys in the test, they're under the target or average 450 weight rider, you've got a problem. Honda went ahead and remedied this by throwing in stiffer spring rates and different valving, which surprisingly everybody agreed was better. The reason being is the bike balance is now better. The heavier guys can go a little bit stiffer when they need to. The lighter guys can simply go softer from that base setting. We felt like what they did with the suspension setup, also in the rear, to complement the front, just brought an overall better balance and a better base setting point for all of us to spread off from, depending upon our needs. The engine last year was also raved upon by being the best Honda 450 engine out there they had delivered so far. Not quite strong on the top end is, say, the KTM or the Husky. Not strong in the middle is the Yamaha, but overall great spread. It makes very competitive power everywhere. The only thing, a couple guys last year thought it was just a little too little off the bottom, a little too smooth and old school Honda, easy to ride. Honda simply went back in with ECU setting changes this year and were able to get a little more bark off the bottom that really seemed to satisfy most of the guys overall. Beyond that, another small change was the engine mounts on the frame. As they went stiffer with the settings, they softened up the mounts a little bit to a thinner material to allow the chassis to flex more, gave a little more compliance to the bike. And then lastly, they added electric start standard. What's really surprising is how much weight the Honda has gained overall, making it right up there with the heaviest of them. But everybody said on the track they can't discern that. It's not as light as the KTM or Husky, which are ridiculously lightweight at this point, but it's pretty close feeling and it's very playful. A lot of guys enjoyed the Honda because of the combination of power, suspension, chassis. Everybody thought it was one of the easiest bikes to ride. There was aggression to it. It just seemed to mesh up the best with all the riders, and that's how it squeaked out the win by literally 1 point this year. So as I said before, there's a lot more to this test. This is simple just sitting down here and giving you guys the quick list. If you want, please check out the article. You can find out where all these bikes finished. You can see how close the top three really are and figure out, what everybody likes and dislikes on this, see where we agree and even where our riders disagree. If you want to check out more, we have the 2018 250F Shootout coming up here soon. And as usual, we got plenty more bike tests here. So keep checking out VitalMX.com. If you're on YouTube, subscribe. There's plenty more to come.